So welcome everyone to Breakfast Chat here on Saturday morning. This is actually a conversation taking back our worlds, and we even heard from Nan Kim, who's based in Milwaukee now. It's that Newark diner is both the go-to diner after clubbing and for after church. So the whole span of life, the whole span of nightlife. Well, you got to have a reason to go to church, right? So with that, welcome everybody. I'm going to pass it over to Professor Arijit Sen, one of my favorite people in the world, to give us an introduction here. Arijit, are you there? Arijit, take it away.
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, welcome everyone. I was focusing on trying to get Facebook Live started, which I couldn't, Luddite that I am. So live is gonna happen later after live. So welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're here back again. Let me tell you a little bit about the project. Taking Back Our World is a project that explores human responses to social and environmental injustice in two cities, Milwaukee and Newark. Over 8 years, our partnership with residents of Milwaukee's Washington Park and Sherman Park neighborhoods has produced stories of caring, heritage, and civic action that is otherwise unheard or ignored by mainstream media oftentimes. We believe in the power of storytelling to transform our world to a better place for all, and we have seen that happen in the work of many of our collaborators, a few of whom are present today. Our stories became part of a larger national traveling exhibit on environmental justice, and that involved 20 other cities, and it was scheduled to show in Milwaukee in June 2020, but the exhibit has been postponed due to the pandemic. But we didn't want to stop. Instead, we decided to send the exhibit materials to our community residents in forms of weekly student design newspapers and zines, stuffed in boxes of fresh produce and herbs offered by 3 local growers, now 4 local growers really. We call these conversation starter boxes. We envisioned a new kind of public conversation emerge through food, printed materials, and online meetings this summer so that residents can discuss ways to fight the historical processes of racism and injustice in their communities. The Saturday series of webinars is part of such conversations where Milwaukee's citizen leaders will have an opportunity to have conversations with change agents in Newark, New Jersey, the home of our institutional partner, the Humanities Action Lab. We hope these conversations will spark new possibilities of collaborations and solidarities across geographic distances in our common journey for a just society. So please come back every Saturday at 11 a.m. for more such discussions in the month of August. I also wanted to welcome and thank our participants from Milwaukee, our guests from Newark, my dear friend Adam Carr, and a dedicated team of students. And I want to mention Chelsea Waite, Tatum Markey, Grant Heimerdinger, Mallory Zink, and many others who made this project a reality. This project was also funded by a generous grant from the Wisconsin Humanities Council. Thank you. Welcome again. Chelsea, this is yours now.
All right, so we are here today to talk about the topic of housing justice, which is absolutely something with a deep legacy here in Milwaukee. I know it also has a legacy in Newark and across our country. So we're going to talk a little bit about the landscape of housing, its history, what it looks like today, then the kind of work that people are doing on the ground in grassroots setting and otherwise to make sure that housing justice isn't just an idea, but a reality. So Chelsea, can you throw up the PowerPoint? I think I'm really excited about this. One of the upshots, I like many of you, you probably had too many Zoom calls this week, but I think what makes this one really special is that it's bringing people across 2 world-class cities, in my opinion, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Newark, New Jersey, cities that I think oftentimes are put in this position of being an underdog and advocating for themselves and may not be on the tip of the tongue of folks when you think of world-class cities, but I know and believe that myself. And we have 5 phenomenal people from those 2 places, and let's get into introducing them. So, LAMONT.
Hi.
Absolutely. So I know actually you could probably talk for 90 minutes about this, but in about 90 seconds, who are you, and talk a little bit about your work in housing?
I'm Lamont Davis. I've been a longtime resident in the Washington Park neighborhood, and I'm the chair of the Housing Committee. I also am a board member of what's called the Neighborhood Improvement District in Washington Park. I have over 20 plus years of experience in rehabbing homes, but I'm also an advocate for people, and I work with a group called Take Root Milwaukee. I'm on the board of the Community Insurance Information Center, which focuses on providing timely insurance information. Have an affinity for a group called Reclaiming Our Neighborhoods, or RON, which does an annual fall and spring survey. And right now, I'm considered a social entrepreneur, as I just started my own construction management company about a year ago.
Dang, Lamont, that is a lot of stuff. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Appreciate you very much. Next, we're going to move to Elizabeth Pearson. Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm an attorney at Legal Action of Wisconsin. I specifically am a public interest fellow there and have been for the last couple years. And we provide free civil legal aid in 39 counties in Wisconsin. And I'm specifically in our community law project, which focuses on several neighborhoods in Milwaukee, including Sherman Park and Washington Park, where we partner really closely with community groups and leaders like Lamont to try to provide legal services that'll really support residents in that community and help stabilize the community. So most of my legal work is in tenants' rights, and I think that's why I'm here. That's what I'm here to talk about, but I'm excited to learn from everyone else.
Absolutely. Thank you. And our third panelist, Chris, was so excellent last week and is excellent in general. We asked her to come back this week. So Chris, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me back again. My name is Kristen Rodriguez. I work with Ironbound Community Corporation as an urban farmer and a community organizer, specifically mostly with like the public housing aspect. And right now we have like a youth group that I mentor. It's called the Down Bottom Bike Crew. And what we do is we bring the youth from different public housing and normally wouldn't visit each other or kind of hang out with each other for whatever reasons. Kind of bring them together, do the bike repairs, and we talk about different housing issues that they have that are happening within their neighborhoods. In addition to that, I take them out to sometimes the housing meetings, like public meetings and council meetings as well. And let the community know mostly about those meetings to kind of inform folks of the community about like different developments that are happening. So a lot of advocacy work and working closely with the housing team and trying to, advocate for different policies and change and things of that nature. But I'm sure I'll get more into it once.
Yeah, absolutely. The Down Bottom Bike Crew. That is an excellent name. And I just cruised over to your Facebook a little bit, and you guys look great too.
Thank you. Thank you.
For sure. Next up, we have Robert Smith.
Good morning and afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to join. Hopefully I'm in good Zoom shape. I've been having some challenges the last couple of days. I'm an associate professor of history at Marquette University, and I direct our Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. I like to say I'm a legal historian. I like to look at the role law and policy has played in the many injustices in our society. And I also like to look at the way law and policy is critical to shaping meaningful definitions and realities associated with full citizenship. And part and parcel to that is exploring the way that folks deeply rooted in our communities and at the grassroots level are key to advancing those options and opportunities. So I'm excited to be a part of our conversation today. Thank you for inviting me.
So Rob is one of my favorite people, and because I know he's going to get me back later, I'm going to do this to him. Before we open the Zoom publicly, he was saying this is not an adorable picture of him.
Come on, man.
I vehemently
Come on,
disagree
man.
with you.
You're killing
This
me
is,
right now.
I think you look
You just
very,
gonna pull the Band-Aid
especially
off.
adorable. So on a serious note, Rob is going to be part of this conversation. And Rob, feel free to jump in whenever you want, but his primary function in the conversation today is one that will come in the most towards the end of the conversation. Last week, Professor Mayer from Rutgers did this position or did this role where he kind of synthesized the conversation at the end. Rob, because I know you have I know you have a depth of knowledge in the world of housing, particularly as it pertains to Milwaukee. Feel free to jump in at any point you'd like to, but we will definitely be hearing from Rob as we wrap the conversation up and synthesize what's similar and different across our two places. And let's go to last but not least, our final panelist, Daniel Wiley. Daniel, thanks for being here. And let's hear a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Daniel Joseph Wiley. I am also from Ironbound Community Corporation. Also, I want to say this, Chris, I hope we should mention this more, but Chris and I, not only do we work together, but we're from the same neighborhood, and we actually work in the same neighborhood that we grew up in. I actually grew up like 2 blocks away from Chris, Newark as a child, which is awesome. And in this photo that I sent, I wanted to put emphasis on who comes from our community, and Queen Latifah is from our neighborhood as well. And then we have Naeem in the background, we have Maria, and then of course me and Chris next to each other. But yeah, I love our neighborhood. I love Newark. But anyway, yeah, so I'm a housing justice program manager at Ironbound Community Corporation. But that's just a fancy term I'm just a organizer, community organizer. I've been an organizer for ICC for about 7 years, but I've been organizing and part of grassroots stuff since I was a child through my parents. But yeah, in the past, 5 years in the housing world, we worked on tremendous policy in the city of Newark. We strengthened our rent control, which is one of the strongest rent controls ordinances in the country. We have inclusionary zoning, which isn't everyone's favorite, but we have a very progressive inclusionary zoning ordinance. And last but not least, which I think is probably the most important piece to it, because we're going through so many evictions as of late, is right to counsel. And Newark became the 3rd city in the country to have a right to the city, right to counsel ordinance passed. And the internal joke is that Newark is the first broke city to do it, because we're actually in the red across the line, especially now. But yeah, so and right to counsel is important because Newark is an extremely poor city, and a lot of folks cannot afford that counsel when they go to landlord-tenant court. So the city partnered with us on that, and it's amazing. It's been working out really great so far, and hopefully we get more funding for it so we can expand it. But yeah, other than that, I love Newark. I was in Milwaukee last year. I'm a baseball enthusiast, so I try to go see stadiums a year, and of course I didn't get to go this year, but last year I was in Milwaukee, biked most of the city. And when we did the HOW thing last year, I was telling folks that were there from Milwaukee, I said, it reminded me a lot of Newark because of its, it's a post-industrial city. Just the communities felt the same. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, happy to be a part of the conversation, and thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. And actually, that was a perfect way to kind of, with some of the work you described, is exactly what we're here to talk about and get into a little bit deeper. With that actually reaches us to the end of our PowerPoint. So now we're just going to be in a conversation. If you're new to Zoom, actually, you can toggle between speaker and the gallery view, so you can see either just the person who's talking or the big group of people who's here. I want to thank everyone for being here as part of this conversation. What you can do, I like doing it this way, is if you have a comment or a question at any point, you can throw it in the chat. That doesn't mean we'll immediately get to it, but the more that you all can, your curiosity can be engaged in this conversation, I think the better it will be. So with that, the first thing I'd like to do, and I really appreciate what you said, Daniel, about our cities having some commonality between them and kind of this post-industrial identity, facing some of the same challenges, is sort of root ourselves in the history of housing justice in both places. So can folks give a historic overview, explain how historical inequities show up in contemporary contexts in your city? And let's start with Lamont, because when I heard what you said it sounds like you're a one-man band trying to dismantle the legacy of redlining. Kind of everything you do touches upon redlining, or the kind of ways in which that helps shape the landscape we're a part of today. Lamont, you are muted right now.
Sorry about that. To start off, I'll say, I have some my partners in crime, Pat Mueller and Mike Howden, on the line, and they help me stay grounded and focused at times because I do have a lot of things going on. But yet and still, I would say that when I look at some of the housing justice issues that we have here in Milwaukee, they're definitely rooted in the fair housing discrimination. If you look at 1968, there was about 40% of Black families that owned their home. In Milwaukee, we're down to 27%. So the post industrialization movement and many small factories and businesses leaving out of the neighborhood did us a disservice. Also, you see median income of Black households as well as non-white households has went down significantly in Milwaukee. And so some of the efforts is about using the home as a vehicle to wealth, and that only affects a small percentage of people. And so what I realized over the years is that as much as you want to do to help home ownership, it's actually a whole community effort. It's helping renters, it's helping people become homeowners. Recently, we've been looking at ways to develop a co-op network. Milwaukee is not known for co-ops, but that also can be a way to people to become entries into home ownership and also shared interests. And what I really mean is I think that we have to find a way for people to value their neighborhood, and that usually only comes through some type of investment, whether it's home ownership, whether it's civic engagement, whether it's volunteerism. Those are all important things that contribute to the fabric of the neighborhood. And in some ways, we have to do more to get people involved in their neighborhood and not just, as we've seen in Milwaukee, people are starting to just go inside the house and just let whatever happens outside of their home happen.
For sure. Elizabeth, do you want to add on to that in your kind of understanding of the roots of what shaped the blooms of today's inequity in Milwaukee's housing world?
I had some notes to address some of that, but I am so glad Lamont did because he did a better job than I could have. And I don't think I'm going to add to it right now.
Cool. Rob, do you want to add anything?
The first couple of thoughts that came to mind were directly related to how similar the residential landscape and those issues seem to be across the two cities. The very first thoughts, of course, is this post-industrial moment. And then, of course, we can't, sitting on top of all of this is the moment we're in, where we know that all of the inequities are going to be exacerbated in profound ways for a very, very long time. And so you have the historical landscape, which has produced a whole range of inequities. And then, of course, you have this moment, which is going to exacerbate them. And it's phenomenal that we're having this conversation and we know how gruesome the realities are in the era of fair housing. It's not as if we haven't been having this particular conversation for decades, and we know that the roots to it extend far beyond. And so housing is, as we all know, that key cornerstone that serves as the launch pad to accessing so many other of our life options. Without decent housing, everything else falls apart. And so to already see the very clear connections between these two cities, and I'm really interested to hear about more of the work and efforts folks are doing in Newark. And we kind of knew this going in, right? We understood why these two cities would be great for comparative thoughts and whatnot. And so those are the first couple of things to come to mind. I really want to hear more about the right to counsel ordinance, though, because that sounds like a very important development. So along with the long-standing political and legal challenges, there then seems to be something here that is very promising. So I'll
Sure.
stop there. I can do this forever. You already know.
Yeah. Let's throw it to Newark then. Chris and Daniel, share a little bit. So, for us sitting here in Milwaukee, you guys opened up a little bit of that conversation. What is the landscape of housing justice, injustice look like where you live?
Daniel, I'm gonna let you take that. I'll add on.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think the stories are the same. Lamont mentioned 68. Newark's history is in 67. Everybody talks about like after that, that's when we saw a lot of white flight, etc. But I think it was before that actually. We had redlining, block busting, etc. Way before my time, of course, and Chris's time as well. But if you go back in history and read about it, it was something that happened in. We all know this across cities across the country. I think in the 80s and, especially in our neighborhood, our neighborhood's surrounded by, it's private houses that are surrounded by, HUD subsidized housing and public housing. So I think in the 80s, you started seeing the downturn of our public housing and the intentional neglect of public housing in our neighborhoods. And in the 90s, you started seeing it. It seemed like it was kind of a lull. But of course, I think in 2008, we started seeing the changes as far as like the G word and gentrification coming. And Newark, because of its proximity to New York City, we kind of take on whatever happens in that city. It's usually late. What happens in Newark, that echoes what happens in New York is usually like 15 to 20 years later. But because of our proximity, we saw, New York City went through its changes and became, just extremely unaffordable to everyday people. Then right across the water, there's in New Jersey, there's a 4 square mile city called Hoboken, which just seemed like overnight gentrified in the 90s or late 90s and early 2000s. Then Jersey City, which is, the sister city to Newark, right across the river from us. That was another one. It seemed like it took 2 weeks for that place to change. And then of course, leading into Newark, which is the last stop on the PATH train. The PATH train is the train that goes into Newark. So the Gentry train ran right into Newark. So we started seeing, and especially in the neighborhood in Ironbound, where Chris and I are from, because of transit-oriented development, we have Newark Penn Station, which is in our neighborhood. We started seeing, the zoning changes around the train station, where folks were fighting. I mean, the city wanted, higher density around there to attract more folks that want to get into Manhattan on a daily basis. And of course, with the higher density came, luxury apartments and things that we can't afford. So, we started seeing the changes. And from there, that's when we started working on the different ordinances. The first one we actually started working on was inclusionary zoning. Once we saw that developers are coming into the city to build, dense and pretty much just have downtown Newark creep into our neighborhood because we do sit on the border of downtown Newark. We started thinking of ways we can fight that. The first thing we questioned is if we could put a moratorium on development, and that just seemed like we couldn't do it because the city needed the tax base that they wanted to move into the city. But our our executive director at the time, actually, he was a city councilman in Hoboken, New Jersey, worked on the inclusionary zoning there. So he pretty much drafted the inclusionary zoning ordinance for Newark. Once that went into City Hall, the initial draft was for extremely low income to 80% of the median income. Of course, that was that went back and forth for about a year or two before it was actually passed. Right now, I believe it's 40% to 80% of the AMI. And also, I mean, it's progressive in the sense that not only is it just for the zoning board for variances, but also for the planning board, and any variance that folks ask for at the planning board, anything over 30 units will trigger the affordability attached to that. And of course, we worked on, we strengthened our rent control ordinance, which I mentioned before, is one of the strongest in the country. There's a 4% cap on that. It's also based on the consumer price index, the CPI. So that fluctuates anywhere between 0.5% to 2%. I haven't seen it go over like 2.5% in the last like 4 years. So that keeps communities intact. And then right to counsel, that was just a blessing from being in proximity to New York City. The person that organized Susanna Blankley, she helped organize the right to counsel in New York, which took 4 years to pass. And in Newark, it took about 6 months. But that's because we had great technical assistance from them. And without going into too much detail right now, the process was basically, the mayor was on top of it ASAP. As soon as we mentioned it to the mayor, Mayor Baraka, he was like, you know what, this sounds like a great idea, because we did have so many evictions going on. But it was based on the fact that, you know, in our county alone, there's about, I think it was 40,000 eviction cases per year. I think it was something like over 90% of those folks go in there unrepresented with any type of counsel behind them. And of course, the eviction rate for that was very high. Also, there's a lot of reasons why it made sense. Then it's for folks, low-income folks. I believe it's 200% of the poverty line. We're trying to fight for it to go higher, but of course, right now, you know, it's kind of hard to do anything because everything's been shut down because of COVID. And but I don't know, Chris, should I add anything else? I don't know. I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, but
it just on a lot of things, like, especially the fact that, you know, majority of like folks who own homes or the public housings are surrounded by these, you know, the folks who own homes. But a lot of the times those folks who own the homes, you know, don't live, you know, there, and it's mostly renters. So we have a high rate of like people who rent. Not a lot of home ownership, especially for folks who look like, you know, me and Daniel. So
For sure.
yeah. And just to add on to that, yeah. So that is a big problem that we have, is the absentee landlords, which leads to, and this is outside of public housing, this is in private homes.
right.
It just leads to the deterioration of the private homes. So code enforcement is a big issue in Newark as well. We only have 8 code enforcement officers for the whole city. And it's a city of, you know, close to 300,000 people. So you just figure, and, you know, being that it's a very old city, most of our housing, you know, housing stock is in extremely poor conditions. And to the point now where Chris, I thank you for sending that flyer out last night. There's actually, and because it's 2008 and all the foreclosures, you know, the city took over ownership of a lot of those abandoned properties, which haven't been maintained since 2008. And now there's actually an auction going on soon for those city-owned properties. So it's just our housing crisis is a mess right now. Pretty much.
That's I want to share something, and I don't want to co-op too much. I just wanted to show, just real quick, I looked this up to show a map of Newark. So Newark is 26 square miles. This is a racial map of you can see the key down here on the bottom, that blue is white folks, orange black folks, green Asian, purple Hispanic. The way that I describe this phenomenon in Milwaukee, you could say segregated, also sort of color coded, right? When we start looking at these maps, and I just want to move over to Milwaukee. Milwaukee is actually about 4 times the size geographically of Newark and twice the population in the metro area. This is our map.
Wow.
We are regularly identified as one of the most segregated cities in the country, and I think, whereas, I mean, if you were to zoom out from the Newark map a little bit, obviously you'd get to New York City and some other, here, what really defines the region that we're a part of, and I think plays a huge role in housing, is the stark whiteness of the suburbs. Like once you get outside of Milwaukee into the suburbs and exurbs, and then obviously into rural Wisconsin, it gets super white really quick. There's also remarkable political polarization across these two places, which probably shouldn't be a surprise. But I think what makes it inherently a big problem is, you know, people of like race living around each other isn't a problem in and of itself. It's when there's inequities between white folks and those who aren't white, right? So if you were to look at a poverty map of the city, it would almost look exactly the same. And just one other piece of background I'd want to share, just because this is something Rob and I do in 60 minutes. I'm going to do it in less than 60 seconds. Milwaukee saw our big civil rights moment was open housing marches, actually. There are, led by the NAACP Youth Council here, the Commandos, Catholic priest named Father Grappi and Vel Phillips. They marched for 200 consecutive nights here in the city of Milwaukee for the issue of open housing and actually played a major role in shaping the national legislation for fair housing. This is a redlining map from Milwaukee that I think continues to reverberate into the legacy. And this is an important thing. I don't know if you guys have these where you are. These are restrictive real estate covenants, as maybe you do. As the suburbs were being developed and plated, essentially almost all of the suburbs said, oh, the people living here shall only be white. That's not true of every square inch of every suburb, but this was legal and codified into the land of the suburbs around Milwaukee. And just to crib something from you, Rob, you'll point out that kind of gives an indication of who's human and who's not, right? Like who can be afforded the full rights of humanity and who can be controlled within it. So Milwaukee folks and Newark folks, we set the stage a little bit. And I know all of you are, the reason you know the history well is because you work against it or try to create a future where the history won't look like the way it has. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening on the front lines in your place and how you're seeing it? So what's the work look like right now? And actually, why don't we go back to Milwaukee?
If I jump in, I would say that there's still a lot of work to be done. Housing choice, housing justice is all about choice. And Adam, you showed some very real maps and figures. And I think what needs to happen is that people need to be able to choose the housing that they want. And that means a mix of, if they want to move into the suburban areas, they should be able to. If they want to live downtown, they should be able to. If they want to stay in the central city, they should be able to. But they shouldn't have to be forced to live in any one particular neighborhood. I think we have some restrictive policies that are in place through one, if you look at how nonprofits work, most nonprofits follow the dollar. They don't really follow the demand of what is going on. So if there is a groundswell that says we need to work on this issue, usually a nonprofit has to find the funding source that matches and not necessarily go ahead and take that on as an issue. Our Community Development Block Grant Administration, where we have dollars that come from HUD, and those are the most flexible dollars that you can use for blight removal, housing programs, urban renewal, but increasingly due to our shrinking tax base, that money is being used to support governmental offices. So over 50% of the money that should be going for community improvement through the CDBG office is being diverted to pay for our police departments, our firefighters, city inter-services. We also have an issue where there's not a lot of investment by the private sector. That's one of the reasons why I'm a social entrepreneur now, because I can contribute to these initiatives because it doesn't, it's all on my dime. So, being the boss of my own company allows me to participate, but we need more efforts from the private sector. Philanthropy, post-COVID, they're shrinking. They're playing to their base. They're contributing dollars to initiatives that they long hold dear and near to them. United Way is a perfect example of a group that's almost impossible to crack and get assistance for new efforts. And I think what we have to do is realize that people are desperate, especially in Milwaukee. Most of us know that there's no county in the whole country where you can afford a 2-bedroom unless you're making at least $17 an hour. In Milwaukee, the average Black household is making about $31,000. So they can't even afford the housing that they live in. So we have people who are doubling up, living on top of each other. We have people who have kind of just, there's a lot of depth of despair where people have just realized that I'm just stuck here in the ghetto and that I'm never going to get out of the ghetto. The Black population in Milwaukee, we're hyper segregated, and of households, there's only 7% of Black households that make over 100K a year. And even with the ones who make 100K, most of them live in poor neighborhoods. So I think some of the work that Elizabeth does And she works with these renters who are, it seems, will never become homeowners. They'll never make it out of the generational poverty that they live in. But at some point, we have to target folks who are on the disenfranchised and get them a leg up in society. And I think, Elizabeth, you know, we have a few landlords who are starting to really feast on our relatively low cost of property. One factor is we have a landlord here, Mr. Barada, who right now is putting in about 25% of all evictions through our court system. And within 20 years, he's amassed an inventory of over 3,000 to 4,000 units of housing. And I'm sure we fought that, the district attorneys have fought that a lot because there's been other Baradas before him. So I would love Elizabeth to kind of talk about some of the stuff that she sees when renters are going to court.
Sure. Thanks, Lamont. I appreciate it. I guess I'll just start by saying Milwaukee does not have right to counsel for evictions. Wisconsin does not have right to counsel. So congratulations to Newark for achieving that. That's a huge deal for tenants. There is a tremendous power imbalance. I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I think a healthy majority of landlords go to court represented, and maybe 10% of tenants end up having an attorney for a case that is about whether they're going to be housed or not, and whether their children or parents or, a single person deserves housing too, whether that family is going to be homeless. And right now people are expected to navigate that system without an attorney. So at Legal Action, we represent tenants in their eviction cases. And we also do try to represent tenants when they're dealing with these situations of conflict with a landlord before it gets to the point of an eviction. I would say sort of globally, an issue that we see a lot is an uneven playing field for tenants and landlords, both in this right to counsel and just the way that the laws are set up. And I mean, this takes into account all of these historical issues that Rob and Lamont talked about are definitely in play. I won't repeat what they said, but it's super important. And then even on this uneven playing field, a lot of folks who rent don't necessarily know all the rights that they do have as tenants. And so another thing that we try to work on is helping renters access that information so that they can at least exercise the rights and power that they do have. And I want to go back a little bit to this issue of the declining homeownership. We do see that it manifests in the form of lots of absentee and corporate landlords who are often less likely to keep their properties maintained. And then we see renters putting up with really poor housing conditions, still paying high rent for them. And then if they get fed up with it and think, okay, what can I do? I'll stop paying rent. Maybe then he'll fix it. Boy, that is just a fast track to an eviction. It becomes very, very hard to win in court in this county in this state if you've stopped paying your rent. And so we're always happy when we can talk to folks sooner about the resources they do have to report to the city or work with local agencies rather than ending up in court. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
So thank you, Lamont and Elizabeth, for that. Also want to point out, folks are showing up in the chat, and I really appreciate that. One point that was made, especially for folks from Newark or not from Milwaukee, Matthew Desmond's book Evicted was written about Milwaukee. Basically, we're the core case studies, so that is certainly something that shapes the landscape. I mean, another point we should also point out, because it's almost the inverse of showing up in the landscape. Wisconsin has by far, by a long shot, the highest rate of incarceration for Black men in the entire country, which absolutely shapes the housing landscape from who's not within it in Milwaukee. And a lot of those men are living somewhere else and become like major clusters in rural Wisconsin. Trudy just pointed out, Trudy's on fire here in the chat, that 53206 is a great documentary about that. So folks from Newark, do you guys want to talk about, the work at the tip of the spear of housing injustice where you are, and kind of what the big scary monsters are that you go out to fight every day?
Yeah. Chris, you want me to start? You want to go start?
Go ahead, go for it.
Yeah.
You the housing like guru. I'm like.
All right, yeah. So one thing that came to mind when you brought the map up, and thank you for bringing that up. Actually, those maps are kind of misrepresentation of some of the communities, because if you look at our community, it's on that map it shows that it's a white community, or some part of it is white, which is there's a European history there, a lot of Polish and Portuguese folks there, but now it's mostly Latinx folks. And the reason why I say it's misrepresentation, we have a very high concentration of undocumented folks in the Ironbound section. And to piece that together with our conversation is, these are the folks that are going through the housing crisis right now. These are the folks that we get most of our calls from. One, I mean, they're fighting the two-headed monster, right? They're fighting eviction, and they're fighting the threat of ICE being called on them on a daily basis. I mean, just last week alone, we got 2 calls from tenants that were being threatened by their landlord for ICE evictions if they didn't pay their rent in a pandemic. That three-headed monster. There's a pandemic as well. Right. So there's a lot going on there. One thing I do want to bring up though is New Jersey is very tenant friendly. Someone brought up the retaliation of folks that call maybe code enforcement or something on their landlords. Jersey actually has a retaliation law where landlords can't retaliate for a call for code enforcement or anything else, any complaint against the landlord. I think it's 60 or 90 days or something like that. So we always tell tenants all the time, like snitch on your landlord, you protect it. But also, I mean, the other thing that we're fighting is our public housing stock is dwindling. In a city like Newark and cities like Milwaukee, where majority people of color, majority poor folks, the need for public housing is there. I mean, we have tens of thousands of folks that are on the waiting list for public housing. Yet 2 of the public housing sites in our neighborhood are at 50% vacancy. Hyatt Court, which is in the neighborhood where Chris and I grew up in, half of it was knocked down. And then there's still vacancies there as well. And then there's Miller E. Terrell Homes, aka Roosevelt's, which has made national news. We've been fighting with them, in the fight with them for the last 7 years. They've gone through, 2 threats of being shut down. And we've just been fighting with them to the point now where it's before everything was shut down because of COVID, we were actually in talks with the Newark Housing Authority and developers to actually keep all 275 units there, plus an additional amount of affordable units there. So it's I guess the fight right now is kind of like everyone in our, not just in our neighborhood, in our city, is suffering right now. One, because Newark has been, our downtown was blighted for so long. It just so happens development was needed there, but it just so happens that once the development started there, other developers started coming into the city and saying, oh wow, well this neighborhood's attractive as well. Let's build here, let's build there. So you start seeing some of the neighborhoods start to go through what downtown was going through, which is gentrification. So the fight, the anti-displacement fight is our main focus right now. But if you talk about who's going through it, I think all of us are, me and Chris included, are fighting for ourselves. What makes it extreme, because not you're taking on the burden of what everybody else is going through, and then what we're going through on top of that. But yeah, we have a long fight ahead of us. I think we can strengthen our inclusionary zoning. It's not great, and I think nationwide inclusionary zoning is everyone's least favorite as far as the tool in the toolbox. Our rent control, because it was a ballot initiative to strengthen it, that expires this September. So of course we have that cloud over our head of like, they might make amendments to that. So we have constantly knock
Yeah.
on City Hall's door, like, yeah, can you fix this? And then right to council, of course. We have to make sure that this gets funded. As mentioned before, like, extremely important. Folks aren't represented in landlord-tenant court. And the more we have, I think New York's numbers show how important it is for a community to have representation in landlord-tenant court. Yeah, and then when it comes to our undocumented folks, that's a fight that's there. We are a sanctuary city and sanctuary state. So there's kind of breathing room when folks are threatened with ICE, but at the same time,
Sure.
empty threats sooner or later are going to turn into actual, actualization. So, Chris, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and just to add that it's COVID and the lack of jobs that are available to the community here, and rent is crazy. You have to make a lot of money. Like I think Lamont mentioned earlier that the average median income was like 31,000. In Milwaukee here is about 35,000. So, and rent for a 1-bedroom can be anywhere from $1,000 to like $1,200-$1,300. And so it's really expensive to try to have a good job and whatever's out there, because sometimes those jobs are not out there that'll pay you, and try to pay rent as well. But I think I want to say that ICC has been really doing a great job with like helping the community, especially the undocumented community, and trying to make sure that they're included in whatever relief that's happening in the city of Newark. Because a lot of times that, if there's any relief, whether it's, federally funded or whatever, if you're not documented because you need to show proof, unfortunately, you're not qualified, quote unquote.
Sure.
So, it makes it hard. So we've been doing a great job in trying to find resources and other funding to try to help those families who wouldn't normally be qualified under, federal rules or whatever it is. So. In addition to that, we're working like really hard with Assemblywoman Timberlake and trying to strengthen to help out with the rent relief for during COVID. Daniel's been working really hard with Assemblywoman Timberlake and other folks to actually try to get that passed and put up to Senate vote so that we can get some type of relief, not just for Newark, but just for all of New Jersey.
Sure.
Yeah.
So something I'm hearing just in the spirit of this idea of taking back our worlds is that you guys, Daniel and Chris, as well as Elizabeth and Lamont, are here as representatives of your community, but there's a lot of folks that you represent when you're here, right? That you're not just kind of and that was my way of maybe shoehorning this in. I just wanted to share these photos a little bit. But I think when you talk about the world of power building, this is the Down Bottom Bike group crew that Chris mentioned earlier, and I think these are just some photos of there we see Chris, of just kind of what it means to organize sometimes. And I think, as important as it is to have your head wrapped around all the intricacies of what we're discussing here today, like it isn't, and you're doing this on behalf of and alongside people, as was mentioned last week by Anthony, this is what we're talking about is a lot about building power and building means by which community members who have been traditionally left out of that power to have a voice within these conversations, and for them to be part of setting the agenda for the world they live in, as opposed to, the world not always happening to you, but you're popping a wheelie on fools. And sorry, that was lame.
It's actually Sorrel Holmes, and that's Jessica. That's actually Daniel's partner. She actually helped create the crew with me. And one of the other pictures is a big guy, like a teddy bear. That's Enoch. He's also part of the housing crew. So all of us collectively like created the crew, the Down Bottom Bike crew.
And also, I think it's important to mention, and I'm smiling because it's crazy, because when I look at these photos and I look at the kids, like these are children of people that Chris and I grew up with, right? And it's kind of like this, it's just dope to see stuff like that. That's all. And then to see Jess and like Enoch in those photos as well. It definitely it's a family affair when we do stuff together. I think that makes it very powerful, very comfortable. to know that people that look like us, talk like us, and live with us are doing the work that we do. So that's always
For
dope.
sure. So we're gonna go over a little bit. Is that cool with everybody? Are you like 10 minutes or so? Would that cool with you, Daniel, Elizabeth, Lamont?
Yeah, I'm straight. I had a cup of coffee. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just use that. We'll go to Rob right after this. So Elizabeth and Lamont, can you guys talk a little bit about the organizing work that you guys have been involved in and seeing of how, you know, people that are being discussed in these conversations directly have a voice within it? Because I know, Lamont, it sounds like from the long list of things you do, you're not just a person, but you're also bringing other people to the table.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, first, there's these two definitions of housing that always emerge. And one is that affordable housing, people should have clean, decent housing. And usually that's through the lens of creating new affordable housing structures. Milwaukee is blessed with an overabundance of existing structures that I don't always think get the same kind of consideration. And so my experience mostly has been on housing rehab for mostly 20 years, leading a variety of different kind of programs that would affect the resident and get their home rehabbed and up to a livable state. Lead hazards. Oh, the echo going?
Again, that reverb.
Yeah. So,
I think keep going.
Okay, so removing those lead hazards and unsafe conditions is one way. And then there's the affordable housing, which has popped up. And Daniel mentioned something that resonates with Milwaukee, the shift from private development, or I should say the shift from public development and creating all those public units have now resulted in overabundance of developer units, which to me are sometimes, in my view, like the new projects. That's what we used to call them, right? Projects when we were younger. And so now I see people moving into this clean, affordable housing, but they have no equity, they have no stake, they're just there. And to me, it's not affordable. To tell someone who is at poverty level that they should be able to pay $800, $900 for rent, that's really a tragedy. So I really think there has to be a focus on increasing home ownership, increasing the available stock of housing that we already have through rehab. And that's what a lot of Washington Park does. We vet out developers who come in our neighborhood, try to make sure that they're doing some type of supportive services or doing something that's gonna add to the character of the neighborhood, rather than a developer coming in, getting all of these subsidies and moving things forward. Another group that I'm working with is Take Root Milwaukee, which was started at the end of the Great Recession. And we saw around the country so many people lose their homes to whatever factors that affected them during the housing recession. A lot of it was predatory lending. A lot of it was subprime loans. And so now Take Root exists. It's a consortium of realtors, bankers, nonprofit groups, housing counseling agencies. And what we do is we try to stay abreast of the latest trends on a macro level, things that are affecting affordability of the housing stock, such as the Community Reinvestment Act. When banks want to merge and grow, they'll come in and do a little bit of goodwill, then they soon disappear. But we try to hold them to their feet to the fire and get a community benefits agreement so that they can help put money into place so that we can do different initiatives. I also work with a group with Elizabeth and Mike Howden, and it's called Reclaiming Our Neighborhood. This is more grassroots. We're not funded, but we've been able to build up a coalition of folks who are neighborhood groups, city and government officials, and what we do is we really share information. We get together on a bi-monthly basis, and we kind of talk about what's going on in their world. So it's a perfect opportunity to hear what's going on with Elizabeth's group. She can tell us what kind of litigation she's seeing going through. And then she's right at the ground to talk to Sherman Park and Washington Park and come in and do renter education workshops and things of that nature. And the biggest thing that the Ron group does, and it's called Reclaiming Our Neighborhoods, the biggest thing they do is they do a fall and spring survey. And that's been severely hampered because of COVID. But one good thing is that we want to use that statistical information and kind of see where there's opportunities for development, where there's opportunities for growth. But as Daniel and Chris said, also, how can we get building inspection involved and get, it's the, what is it, a little bit of honey, and then we have the stick. And so with the landlords, only thing we have is the stick. We just have to hit them upside the head. And so I think it's very, very hard. It's very hard doing this work because I think there's not enough funding to help people who want. And I don't think people have the voice. They don't always know what to go and ask for. And so I consider myself as an advocate more than anything. It's very hard to consider myself as an expert in any one thing, maybe a jack of all trades, but an expert, no, because the landscape shifts. It shifts so suddenly that one minute you're working on this issue, the next minute, scratch that, here's the new fire in the neighborhood. And so I think, as we move forward, there has to be a push for more community involvement, more civil engagement. People who are affected by these situations should be on this call. I would love to hear the mother who was evicted tell us her story and what she went through than anyone's story that is on this call today. I want to hear about people who have been in generational poverty that haven't escaped the central city of Milwaukee ever. Those are the kind of stories, testimonials, and people that we need to join our movement. And they're here, but they're also sometimes struggle to find their voice. And so I think when we think of that and what Chris and Daniel is doing in New York and what we do here, it's all about empowering. And, I've been doing this for a while now, and I used to be the youngest guy in the room, and now the gray starts to tell me I'm becoming one of the older people in the room. I'll be remiss if I didn't say, this is a young person's movement. Young people need to step up, tell us what's going on. We need to listen, and we need to step back and give them the power so that they can move forward and continue to fight. And the fight may not be the way that we want it to be. It's a different fight for them because they have a different purview of what they're looking at. Yeah. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Elizabeth, anything you want to add before we throw over to Dr. Rob Smith?
I'll be really quick, but just so I don't get in trouble, I do have to state for the record that legal action does not organize anyone because we are prohibited by federal law from organizing anybody. We receive federal funding and we're not allowed to do grassroots activism or organizing. So that, somebody made a point earlier about sort of dollar-driven nonprofit activity, and I'll just leave that there. I will say, though, that we really appreciate our partnerships with community groups and organizers and activists. And Lamont and some of the other people on the Ron Coalition that he mentioned have really helped us to design our community law project in a way that we hope is truly supporting and serving that community. Whatever knowledge or information or support we can give, we're always happy to. And we're really trying to be driven by people on the ground in the legal work that we do.
For sure. So we're kind of at that time. We're a little bit after the time. And Rob, do you want to do a little bit of synthesizing, share some of the points that you saw that stand out to you? And I like folks are already expressing in the chat, this has been a remarkable conversation. I just appreciate everyone's participation. Rob, what do you got to say?
My comments are my own, and they are not in any way connected to any of the agencies that might have supported this particular conversation. And I want to make sure to say that up front, because I think there are some very clear realities that might challenge political neutrality, but I have to say them. first of all, cities are still the places where the cool shit happens. You can gentrify it, you can do whatever you want to do to try to fabricate that, but the cultural authenticity of our cities can't be recreated through any kinds of class-based prisms. Cities are still where it pops off, and we can't I can't have our conversation close without us just recognizing how important the urban landscape remains, particularly in terms of its cultural richness. This is still where all the cool stuff happens, and that's why it's so important, the work that everybody's doing, because we all know the importance of not only making sure that these fundamental human rights are protected, because without a home, your life options dissipate quickly. Without a home base to make sure you have an address, to get a driver's license, to get any kind of state ID, to vote, to go to school, to get employment. You all know very clearly how important it is that you have a home for the any chances you might have in life, and that's clear. And we also, I want to also state one more time that we're having these conversations after 50 years of fair housing policy from our federal government, state government, and local government, which is shameful. Which gets us to, I think, the very important connections that we're making about and around how to deal with these injustices. And it is grassroots activism that is most important in the moment, because government has failed us over and over and over in this process. Much like government has failed us over and over and over with policing, which is why people are calling for defund efforts, which are, just to respond to the chat, the defund call is simply saying, let's stop having police do things that they're not trained to do. Let's make it an employment question. Nobody is going to be paid to do a job that they are not skilled to do. If you're not skilled and trained to handle mental health, if you're not skilled and trained to handle other social services, then you shouldn't be called to do those jobs. And if you are supposed to provide safety to the community that is central to your existence, and you're not doing that, then that's problematic, even at a basic employment level. If you're not doing your job right, if you can stop hundreds of thousands of people over any number of years, and 80% of the time, 90% of the time be wrong about why you stopped them, then how do you keep your job if you can be wrong 80% of the time? And our stop and frisk case are also another important connection in this sort of urban realities between Newark and Milwaukee. The way that policing operates, we know, is to also protect residential boundaries. Policing as an extension of white supremacy is the extra legal arm of the way racial geographies are maintained, shaped, and ultimately controlled and surveillanced. And there's no conversation we can have today where policing doesn't creep into it. And the defund calls are central, because what we've seen is a very well coordinated conversation about what the police abuses are and how to address them in the presence and in the face of governmental failure. And it's the grassroots mechanisms that have been key to raising the level of the conversation to where 7 to 14 million people are in the streets talking about it. To this conversation specifically, I cannot imagine any other option available beyond me communicating with the folks here in Milwaukee and the folks in Newark and any other folks around the city. I've been chatting with Esme from Indianapolis. I need to hear from them. To do my job well, Rigid, as a humanities scholar, I need to hear from more grassroots folks about the ways in which strategies are working to make sure human beings in our cities receive the human rights that they are entitled to, not only from this government, but as a part of an international conversation that's been shaped over the second half century of the United States. If I sound a little bit incensed, I apologize, but not really. This is where we are. I need to hear from Daniel and Christian about what's happening in Newark so that I can be better informed about the potential for the impact here locally. If that's called organizing, Richard, I'm sorry. I really am. But this to me is about human rights. And if my folks over in Newark and my peoples in Indianapolis, if they got some ideas to make sure that my family here in Milwaukee is going to be treated with the human rights they deserve, then I need to be a part of them and call it something else then. But I need to hear what's working. Adam, that's my 2 cents.
For sure. Daniel, next time you're in town, you and Rob could get a tandem bike, ride around town. I think so. A lot of great stuff in the chat. That said, we are about 10 minutes past noon, so we're a little bit past where we wanted to end. I just want to express appreciation for everyone who came. I love seeing the chat light up and tons of questions and comments and people exchanging with each other there. I appreciate everyone for making it, whether you're in Milwaukee, whether you're in Newark, whether you're from somewhere else sitting right now. Chelsea put in the chat Anna Regis did a survey that will help them in this conversation moving forward. And that being said, any other housekeeping business? There's going to be 2 more of these. Chris, you are welcome to come back, you and your Peace Lily, to another one. We enjoyed having you. But next week we'll be talking about it's taking back our bodies, a conversation that will be in your wheelhouse, actually, Chris, around urban gardening and kind of just the bigger picture of health that people struggle with in Milwaukee and Newark. And then we're going to have a last conversation that's really going to be about getting shit done. So with that, I just want to close with this idea to a point, Daniel, that those Facebook pictures illustrated, and to your point, Lamont, I went to a phenomenal public high school in Milwaukee named Rufus King, and I have seen, and I think this directly connects to this conversation of housing, I've seen my remarkably talented classmates and subsequent generations of graduates from that high school try really hard in Milwaukee, be really ambitious here, and lose interest after the city just beat them into submission. They go to other places and they become remarkable, and then their kids are biking around with Daniel and Chris in Newark, theoretically. But I think that is, a big piece for Milwaukee to become a place where young people can see as a viable place to invest in themselves and their future. I think if we don't figure this out, we're going to keep hemorrhaging in Milwaukee the kinds of young people that, Lamont, you want to see come up and fill the ranks behind you, because Milwaukee gives a lot of gifts to the rest of the country and the rest of the world, from particularly the Black and brown people who grew up here, who are remarkable and talented and skilled and bring their talents to other places. So may we as Milwaukee within our generation make this a place where young people see it not as a place that they have to get away from or overcome, but a place that they can fold their energy, their lives into, and not just see it as a place to be an antagonist in their story. So thanks, everybody. That was my last 2 cents.